All right, so let's get started. This is going to be more of a show rather than a tell webinar. I have our test platform CDRouter set up with some results from a selection of our security test modules. And as we go through, I want to show you not only those test modules and why they're good exercises for your device under test, but also the ease with which the analysis and repeat testing of these issues can be done in CDRouter. Now, it's important to note that with security testing, is kind of a fuzzy area. And while CDRouter won't necessarily solve all your security problems for you, the testing regimen behind it is really good and necessary to weeding out these issues ahead of time. And we'll show you some of the tests that do that. So I want to talk first about our methodology when creating security tests. And it's important to recognize the distinction between tests that we've developed because of requirements that are defined by industry standards and those that can be considered best practices. So obviously the former normative requirements that are defined in standards or published security vulnerabilities like on MITRE are easier to make tests for, that we can definitively say, yes, you should absolutely do this and correct this problem. Other things like best practices should be used based on your deployment scenarios. So you have to kind of decide for yourself whether it's something that you should be doing. Even if a lot of people say it's a good idea, it might not be relevant to your deployment or to your products. So yeah, ultimately those are up to you and your needs. So what are we going to look at today? First, I want to show you sort of a baseline test using our Nmap add-on. Nmap is the most popular port scanning tool, and we automate its use in CDRouter to give you a picture of how your DUT appears on the network to would-be attackers. Then we'll take a look at some firewall test cases, seeing how unconfigured ports are replied to. Then we'll take a look at one mechanism for implementing something like parental controls if you're using URL filtering. So our URL filtering test will check to make sure that a configured URL is blocked when it's accessed. After that, we'll show you one of our tests that look for the use of old cipher suites when trying to securely access the DUT's user interface. When these suites have been successfully cracked, it's best not to use them anymore, but obviously there's a lot of code out there that probably does. And lastly, we'll take a look at a recent published vulnerability that was pinned on tier 69, but actually involves a code injection attack over a different management protocol. And we actually found that it was several different management protocols that all were vulnerable to the same code injection attack and had more to do with the code injection than the actual vulnerability. So I will open CDRouter here. So here's CDRouter. We've already done these tests ahead of time for the ease of this webinar. But you'll never build a test, if you've never built a test package before, you'll find these tests in the test list when you build a package. So if I go to packages here, you can actually easily search for some of them. So you can look for OS detection, which is one of the Nmap tests we'll be using. And these, you can see the modules that contain these. Our firewall tests are in the core CDRouter stuff. Unless you're doing IPv6, it's in our IPv6 add-on. But you put together a package with the security tests that you want to do. And one of the things that is good for making it repeatable is to actually create that as a test list. And when you do that, that package will then show up as a list that you can grab tests from later. So when you figure out which security tests you want to use, you put them all together and then mix and match them later. If you're doing regression testing, you can track the progress of your DUT security testing by putting it into our device database, and this will let you correlate the device with a set of results so you can see the progress over time. One of these definitely has more than one test, but I just want to show you what that looks like. So if this has way more than just security tests on it, but if you were to do this, you would be able to see sort of the progress from start to finish. If you're doing the same security tests over and over and they were failing at first and then you finally all of them succeed, you can see the progression of that. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is we're going to our results, and all of the ones that I have are tagged with security so that I could easily find them. And the first one I'm going to show you is this test with a Cisco E4200, and this is our Nmap test that I was talking about. And I've flagged these two tests here so that we can easily get to them. And this is, we're going to do Nmap's port scan for operating system detection, and an attacker would use this to try to see what kind of system the device under test is running. And that gives them more information about the kinds of attacks they can carry out. So ideally, the response when doing this test doesn't reveal any information. So when you see that we did this on the WAN, they do the port scan and it says out of 1,000 scanned ports, they were all filtered and there were no responses. And so that didn't give enough information in order to get the operating system details. And that's ideally, if you're looking to have that level of protection, this is what you should see. Now on the LAN side, and again, this is up to your deployments, we have an example of what happens when that doesn't work. So here we do the scan, and you can see that it detected that it's running Linux. It detects what kernel it's running, and this is enough information for a would-be attacker to at least get some level of information that they could use to look up what vulnerabilities exist in that particular operating system and carry on from there. So like I said again, it's a best practice to make sure that this doesn't happen. I wanted to show you what it looks like on the LAN, just because the reason why it probably responded this way on the LAN is because it's assuming that the LAN is trusted. But of course we know you can't necessarily trust that. The next one I want to show you is our firewall test cases. And this is going to make sure that, so it's kind of a matter of debate how ports that can't be accessed should appear. And it's a general best practice to make sure that ports that are closed don't actually respond. It's called stealth mode. So in this case, we actually scan all these ports right here from 0 to 2048, and we see what appears. So the DUT is responding to them, saying that this port is closed. And what an attacker can do to use that is that now it knows that there's something there. If it received absolutely no response, then there would be no way for them to determine whether or not this just wasn't an active system or not. So we have that test to determine whether or not that they're replying in stealth mode versus closed. And then the other firewall test we have here is to make sure that when something is actually closed, in this case port 80, which may be the device under test's GUI, that it was denied from the WAN side. And this is so this actually allowed it. With all of these tests, obviously you have to make sure that your device is configured the way that you expect the test to run. And you can, in the CDRouter config, there are places where you can change, which ports you want to try and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that your DUT's configuration matches the test that you're going to do. So you can use these tests to verify that that configuration is accurate and working. So next I'm going to show you what happens with when using old Cypher suites here. So you may have heard of the Heartbleed vulnerability, which is kind of an overrun attack using an older SSL version. And we have an example of it here, but this device actually succeeds in the test. So we can't show you exactly what happens when it fails, but this test will actually verify that you're not vulnerable to that attack. And so it goes through and actually does it. And then, so if you see the steps here, it'll try to transmit a heartbeat message whose length field is larger than its payload, which was the origin of the original attack, and then make sure that the server does not respond to that message, and it does not here. That one's not that exciting, but the thing that we found often is that deprecated SSL ciphers are still active on a device's GUI. And that means that anyone who's using those ciphers are deprecated because they've been cracked or they've been exploited in some way, and you want to make sure that you're not using any of those. So we actually have a test here where we try several older protocol versions. And then this, you can configure which ciphers you want to use in the CDRouter config. And you can see I'm using these the comments here to kind of more easily navigate and turn them on and off here. But you can see here that it actually established a session with an older cipher when it was expected to fail. And as I said, that's not necessarily good practice because those older ciphers have already been exploited in the past. Next, I'm going to show you, so a lot of people are implementing parental controls. And so this is sort of a security, not necessarily an exploit, but a security function from the user perspective, right? Just like a firewall. So this is something that the user expects to be able to work correctly. And so in this case, we've set up some URLs that we want blocked. In this case, we're kind of dating ourselves here because we used myspace.com. I'm surprised that it even responds at all. Does MySpace even still exist? I'm not sure. Anyway, so one way to do the URL filtering is to handle it with a proxy, and you can see that it's handled here, and that the URL was successfully blocked. Did not find it. So if this is something that your device implements, you would set up ahead of time the URLs that you want blocked, and then go into CDRouter config and set up and tell the config which ones you expect to be blocked, and it will try those by creating a web server. You can see right here, and then seeing if the device allows that to be accessed from a host on the LAN side. Lastly, I want to show you this this TR64, TR69 vulnerability that came out at the end of last year. And it caused a lot of news around TR69 because it's actually an attack on the TR69 connection request port. And the actual attack ends up not having anything to do with TR69 whatsoever. It's just the fact that this port was used for a management protocol. And what actually happened was the devices that were vulnerable would respond to different applications over that same port. In this case, an older management protocol that was intended for the LAN only called TR64. So in this test, we send this TR64 request over the TR69 connection request. And we built this test module, this TR69 conrec.tcl test module after this attack. And it tests a whole bunch of things about the connection request, not just this attack. So we're sending this TR64 command, and you notice that we're doing some code injection here. And this test just tests to that it doesn't receive a response. In this case, it does, which is a failure. We don't actually test the code injection attack here because we want to make sure that each metric is kind of its standalone thing. But here you see the response, and this is TR64 application information, which was originally based on UPnP. So now, when we actually test the code injection attack, you can see that we put this backticked escape character command in the value of this TR69 set parameter values. Now, as I was showing before, in TR60, this is a TR64 message, and we're using the same thing. And so we thought to ourselves, we wonder if it's more than just the fact that it's that particular management protocol, and if there's just a general code injection attack problem. So we tried it with TR69 as well, and found that if there's no data validation on this, which is really what this comes down to, so a code injection attack will be vulnerable if you're not verifying that, if you're not rejecting values that shouldn't be accepted. You can see that the ping actually starts to that fake domain right here. So it's actually working. So we're actually to do that code injection attack. We entertained the idea of trying to do it with UP and PDM as well, but this device didn't support it. But in theory, any of the management protocols, so you can see that it failed here, and it failed because of that. In theory, any of the management protocols that accepted those commands would be vulnerable to the same code injection attack. The last thing I did want to show you is that if you are using our CloudShark service, this attack actually was turned into a security rule by the security experts out there in the CDRouter rule set, and so I have it right here. So if I were to just show you how to upload files to CloudShark here, in our threat analysis tool, you actually see it appear, and then in our threat vectors, you can actually see the exploit appear, and it shows you what happened. So if you are a user of our CloudShark service, our threat assessment tool will actually catch some vulnerabilities that have been published as CDRouter rules, which isn't necessarily all of the things that we test at kind of a low level when it comes to home gateway. So how do we go about fixing these things? The first thing that we stress with security testing is repeatability. So if you're looking to weed out security issues by seeing whether or not a patch worked or not, it's best to build a test package that you're going to run the same time every time, or the same way every time. And like I said before, you can find these tests in our test packages and build this package such that it will repeat itself every time. And then if you really do want to turn it into, if you get a set of security tests that you really like, but you don't necessarily want them to always be part of the same package, you can build them into a test list. And they'll show up here just as if they were another test module. And then you can select the test that you want from that test list. And to do that, when you create the package, you check here and say use as a test list. The next thing you want to be concerned with is being able to associate tests with a record of the bug or vulnerability. And we do this in CDRouter 10 through our web API. You can integrate with a continuous integration system like Jenkins or Bamboo to be able to start tests and return results to those systems. And so you can associate it with a given bug that's been reported or a vulnerability that's been reported. All of the details for that are on our support page at support.qacafe.com. If you search for the API, all of the info on using our web API is here, and pretty much any function that you can do with CDRouter, you can do through our API. We also have a pretty detailed webinar on this topic. It's from a little while back, but it's pretty detailed, and we do show you how to integrate it with, I think it was Jenkins. That was the example that we did. And then there's a couple ways that you can actually build other tools, like we had a Ruby gem that lets you get a text message when your test is complete, and some other neat API tricks. You've already seen some of the collaboration tools that I've been using. You've seen like the commenting. Remember, everything here is a URL. So if somebody else has access to the system and you're looking to show them exactly what you're looking at, if you pass them, a link to the log, you can see that any of the changes that I've made show up in the URL. So if you want them to see exactly what you're looking at, you copy this and send this to them. When they log in, they'll see exactly what you're seeing. But also reporting to customers or to management that vulnerabilities have been fixed. And there's two ways to do this. You can either, whenever you go to a result, so I'm going to go back to our results here. So let's say we go here. If you go to printable report, this will actually show you what happened and what didn't in a really sort of short way. And it shows you which tests were run. And most browsers will let you save this or print it into a PDF. But also this is a URL. So if someone has access to the same system, you can send this to them and they'll look at it and see the results. So it's a nice way to kind of prove things. And then the other way you can actually do this is if your customer has a CDRouter system We go into the results again. You can export them. And when you export them, you can then import them again here. And so you can export the results, send them to your customer who also has a CDRouter. They can drag it in here, and then not only will they see all of the results that you have, they'll also be able to exactly rerun the test that you did. So if they are doing a second level of verification at their labs, they can use the exact same setup that you used. All right. So that's pretty much a quick overview of the stuff that we have in CDRouter for security testing. There are a lot more tests than that, obviously. So the last thing we do want to say is if you do have any input on additional security tests that you've seen or things that you want to see covered by CDRouter, feel free to email our support group, support@qacafe.com. And the full description of all of our test cases are on our support page under test summaries. And we also have several blog articles in our training on our main website on most of the things that we've covered today. So going all the way back to the Heartbleed attack under training. So if you search for any of those things, you'll find it. So thanks a lot for joining, everyone, and we'll follow up with you later. And if you have any input, please contact us. Enjoy the rest of your day.